author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy has unceremoniously shown the door to the lower chamber. The third GOP primary debate approaches with a crowded field just waiting to be cut down. RFK Jr. says he has a major surprise coming up, and both Hunter Biden and Donald Trump draw the gun crime criticism. Now, all this and a lot more are awaiting you on today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, right here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. I'd just like to offer a special thank you to our listeners on WFYL out in Chester Springs, Philadelphia, who are listening on 1180 AM. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access breaking news, analysis, top stories, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. With the unprecedented ousting of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, what comes next? Who's going to be able to take the mantle? And what does it mean for politics in the U.S.? We're very fortunate to be joined today by Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for coming back in, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Tim, you and I were glued to the ousting of Speaker McCarthy. Now, personally, I thought that as soon as they got the 11 votes to proceed with the motion to vacate, I thought it was a done deal. What were your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts were that the answer to all those questions you asked at the beginning is, who knows? Because this
and
really,
that's it for this episode. No.
Yes. What? Because here's the fundamental truth in Congress, in politics, as in life. It's very difficult to replace something with nothing. And in this coup d'etat, which is essentially what it is, it's the palace guard overthrowing, the head of the government, in a sense, the equivalent to that. There was no alternative candidate. There wasn't throw out McCarthy and put in, say, Jim Jordan. Okay, there was no alternative presented. So when you replace something with nothing, then you can only get one thing as a result, and that's chaos, and that's what we've got right now. As of the time we're speaking here, there is no clear candidate, because certainly the Democrats are not going to cooperate and say, oh, yeah, he seems like a good candidate, we'll support him. No. I think at this point, this is how bad it is, Mark. There's a plausible scenario where the Congress will have no choice but to name the Democratic minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries, as Speaker of the House. Look, I think they'll do everything, of course, to short-circuit that, but imagine how feckless and pathetic the Republican Party will look if they can't even pick a leader amongst themselves. And frankly, you look down the list, I suppose Jim Jordan would be very popular, but he said very clearly he has no interest.
That is very true.
No interest.
He says no interest, but would he accept it reluctantly? Which I think really is it should be the one prerequisite for power, is you don't want it.
Yes.
Would he reluctantly accept that over having Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House and derailing all of the investigations and committees that Jim Jordan's heading up at the moment? I think that he would. If it were a choice between Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House while there's a Republican majority versus Jim Jordan saying, I will take the mantle, I think he would take it. And then, of course, Steve Scalise has been floated. And I know he's had some health troubles recently, but I know that many of those the 8 who eventually voted against Kevin McCarthy, many of those would accept Steve Scalise, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
I think those are two
potential.
viable candidates.
Donald Trump. Some people are saying it.
As we are wanting to remind people, you do not have to actually be a sitting member of Congress to be named Speaker of the House. They can pick the guy that cleans up the garbage in the Capitol and name him the Speaker if they want to.
Right? They might get more done with that. Let's be fair.
He's yes, Mark, you're correct. But there's no protocol for this because it's never happened before. We haven't even had a challenge really to a sitting speaker in more than 100 years.
Yeah, so, 1910, I think it was, wasn't it?
Just like, so you have a Republican Party with a likely presidential candidate who's been indicted 4 times and is currently involved in 2 or 3 more civil cases. So we're talking a full-time defendant as your presidential nominee. And now a majority in the House of Representatives with no representative on top, with no speaker. And so, look, Jordan and Scalise are probably the 2 most obvious. Both of them wanted about as much as the plague. However, I think it's going to be depicted exactly like it did to Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
Paul Ryan was a policy wonk. He was a leading thinker in the conservative movement. And I knew it the moment that he accepted, oh so reluctantly, to become speaker, that his legacy would be ruined. Because as a speaker, you have to be a deal maker, which means you have to force feed people stuff they don't like. Nancy Pelosi was very effective as speaker because she kept her caucus united. And she was able to, for example, suppress the voice of the squad when it was necessary to win a presidential election in 2020. The Republicans have not had that kind of leadership really this century. And as a deal maker, Scalise and Jordan become diminished in their influence. But there are other people. For example, I always thought Mike Gallagher, a congressman from Wisconsin, very effective. I don't know if he's a good vote gatherer or leader of men per se, but there are, let's face it, there's 222 whatever people to pick from just in the House itself. So the key is not, I don't think, getting a unanimous vote among Republican members of Congress. What it is finding a candidate who could attract a unanimous vote.
Yeah, it's a tricky balancing situation. It's really not helped by the minority leadership, and of course it wouldn't be helped because they're just determined to cause as much chaos and make as much hay as they can, whilst the Republican Party is creating its own chaos, or its own vacuum, perhaps is the right way to put it. And something that really stood out to me was Hakeem Jeffries. He messaged out directly after the vote. He said, House Democrats will continue to put people over politics, I'm reading this, and work together in a bipartisan way to make life better for everyday Americans. Normal boilerplate stuff. Then he goes into, it is our hope that traditional Republicans will walk away from MAGA extremism and join us in partnership for the good of the country. Now, this blew me away because 2 questions arise here. Who are the MAGA extremists that he's referring to? And are they the same people that he'd only moments ago rallied alongside with his party to vote with? That's the first one, right?
Well,
these MAGA extremists that he voted the same as, right? But he voted the same as MAGA extremists.
You're acting shocked that there would be a floating political coalition that would be dumped the moment the usefulness of one side of that coalition had been evaporated. It had been used up, right? They had served their purpose. And, you know, in the end, Matt Gaetz and his fellow, I would call them GOP insurrectionists, political insurrectionists, okay, are going to be
That's not
seen.
necessarily a bad moniker because, George
Well,
Washington was
that's
also
what.
one, right?
Well, that's true. Well, look, that's what Matt Gaetz wants.
Yeah.
He wants to be the leader of the revolution along with Trump. He wants to be the Trump of the House of Representatives. The problem is there's only one Donald Trump, and anybody who's tried to just imitate him has only embarrassed themselves. That's the problem.
And that is a great note to finish this segment on. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much. We'll be back with Tim in just a short moment, speaking the third upcoming GOP debate. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we were talking the upset in the House with the removal of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But now I want to move on to the upcoming November GOP third debate. Now, Tim, you've been watching the debate so far. You've provided your analysis on the pages of libertynation.com. What do you predict for the third GOP debate?
I predict it will be dramatically overshadowed by the fourth debate of the season, which will match one of the Republicans against the shadow candidate of the Democrats.
Right. So Ron DeSantis versus Governor Newsom. Yeah.
Gavin Newsom. These are the bookends of American politics, California and Florida. What many would describe as far left and far right, and what many people could rightly predict is a preview of the 2028 presidential race, because DeSantis may have been brought low by Trump this time around, but I don't think that disqualifies him to be taken seriously in 2028. But in terms of your actual question, which is the third official grand old party debate, look, it's narrowing more and more. It went from 8 in the first debate to 7. Somehow, among the 7 candidates was still Doug Burgum, who actually I thought made a couple of decent statements. But
he was channeling his inner Scorsese. Yes.
let's don't get me off point, please. But so it will narrow even further, because instead of needing to have 2% showing in certain polls, as in the first debate, or 3% like in the second debate this time, they'll have to hit a 4% marker on a few different indicators, shall we say, in polling, in both nationally and in states, early states.
Yeah, so it's an and or. It's 4% in either 4% national, or 4% national, 4% early voting states. And there's that 70,000 donor thing as well. Let's not forget that.
Yes, well, the donors. But, again, that became, frankly, a joke, because Doug Burgum unleashed the $1 donation in return for a $19 gift card. So basically, Burgum
within the rules. It was a smart move. I mean, that's a guy thinking outside of the box, as they say.
That's true. But all it did was include somebody in the first 2 debates who just took time away from the candidates who actually have a chance.
So who will that leave us with, Tim, for the third debate, realistically?
Let's say that Burgum drops out. Christie will not drop out, because he still polls at near double digits in New Hampshire,
right,
and on near 0 everywhere else. But that's one of the qualifying factors, because he's put his entire campaign in New Hampshire, cleverly knowing that by just getting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% in New Hampshire, he'll be included in every debate. So it's actually a smart political strategy on his part. but at the same time, ultimately so cynical because he knows he has no chance, because he has no organization outside of New Hampshire, because he has no money, because people know he has no chance. And people know he has no chance because his sole raison d'etre in the race is to attack Donald Trump. And honestly, I don't even think he's done a very good job of that with his Donald Duck.
Oh my God, that was the most
That
cringe-worthy moment on stage. It was
that was just awful.
It was the look of self-smug satisfaction that he had when he delivered it. My God, I mean, that is a meme in itself. The look on his face when he delivered that line. That to me, that is Dukakis wearing the helmet in the tank. That's what that moment was.
Yeah, I think, look, Republican voters writ large have basically have one message at this point in the process, or process, as you say in England.
Depends on the schedule.
Just okay, we're right on schedule. So they want the people that don't have a chance to just leave the stage. They want to look at Ramaswamy and Haley and DeSantis and Scott, and that's about it. Yeah, Pence probably will eke his way in, barely making the threshold, even though there's really no basis for his candidacy, considering a big part of the basis is we did so much during the Trump administration.
Yeah, who's that we?
He's running against the guy who did all this. So it's obviously some manner of revenge candidacy, just like Christie. So that's what people want. They want them to leave the stage. So we can see the four that realistically can call themselves live candidates. And I think Tim Scott really hasn't made a dent either. But I think people feel like he's so viable for the number 2 spot that they'd like to continue seeing him. And so, look, this
they want to keep him in, if only for a second slot. He does appear to have a lot to offer in that position. And they want to keep him in.
The third debate will essentially either be meaningful in the sense that somebody breaks through as the most likely to be selected by Donald Trump for vice president, or it becomes utterly meaningless because Trump is certain to win the nomination and not pick any of those candidates anyway for his ticket. He may have someone completely different in mind. Who knows? There's very, very few tea leaves to read in terms of who Trump's going to pick. And let's remember, the most important single choice to be made is who Trump picks for VP, because that person gets a huge jump on 2028. And Mark, even if Trump loses, he can be free of the tarnish if he does a good job as a VP candidate on the campaign trail.
A good thing to look out for. We're looking forward to the debate. I hope you are at home too. Now, don't go anywhere. After this short break, we'll be back talking the fly in the Democrat ointment. Or is it the Republican ointment? We'll find out. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, joined once again by long-term host of this here radio podcast, Mr. Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we talked the ousting of Kevin McCarthy. We talked the prospective third GOP debate. But now let's talk a bit more cross-border, Tim, if I may. And specifically, RFK Jr. Is about to make a big announcement on the 9th of October, so just after this show goes out. And many people suspect that will be him announcing an independent run. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's probably more likely, we're splitting hairs to some degree, but not really, and I'll explain why. I think it's more likely a third party run.
Right,
I think it's more likely that it's the Libertarian Party, and the reason is, number one, he's had conversations with them, and they seem open to his style of politics. Although he's a bit interventionist for their liking, but they've, in 2020, they put forward two candidates who were really not libertarians, but had big names. I think it's most likely, and the reason is it'd be easier for him to run as an independent instead of as a libertarian, say, as opposed to an independent, is ballot access. The Libertarian Party has not been successful in attracting votes, but they have been successful in gaining ballot access. And of course, that's critical. So RFK, if he wants to run some wildcat campaign as an independent, fine. But the chances of getting on the ballot, especially in critical states, is
tens of millions of dollars, if not more.
It's not doable. But if he becomes a Libertarian Party standard bearer, he is in the discussion. He's someone who can affect the outcome both by attracting even 2 or 3% of the vote and by promoting ideas that may force a Biden or a Trump to kind of accommodate a little bit so as to try and win back the people that would plan to vote for RFK. I think the question is, Mark, could he get 2 or 3%, or could he get 12 or 15%? I don't think anybody thinks he can win the election, but
yeah, I mean,
he could.
Is this a Ross Perot moment, right?
Precisely, because of course Perot got 19%. Now he was far more well financed than RFK Jr. is, but I think RFK Jr. what he lacks in breadth, in terms of his support, he makes up for somewhat in depth. He has true believers to his campaign. Some will say they're anti-vax deniers and all the rest because he has raised alarm bells about the downside of the COVID vaccine and many others. Okay, he's anathema to the Democratic Party, both because he has the audacity to challenge Joe Biden and because he just doesn't, he isn't down with the party line. He's not a far left progressive. He is a true Democrat in the tradition of his own father, who challenged the establishment. And that's exactly what his son is doing now. But I see Democrats trying to say, well, he'll probably draw just as many votes from Republicans. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, it's all speculation. There's so much uncharted territory.
Let me dive in on this, Tim. There was an anonymous campaign worker or staffer for RFK apparently speaking to Mediate, I think it was, and they said that we're definitely going to be pulling votes from Donald Trump. Now, I wonder if that is just not a play to try and make sure that he gets as many votes as he can from the Democrats. So if the Democrats are worried about, let's say, people who are nominally Democrat who would vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, if they have, as it were, the permission concept to vote for RFK rather than Joe Biden without letting Donald Trump in, then they'll feel free to do so. So the idea could be...
That sounds like about 5D chess.
I mean, if you're not playing 5D chess at this level, Tim,
5D chess.
What are they doing if they're not playing that? But here's the thing.
I suppose you're right.
RFK, he's for cryptocurrency. He's for decentralization, two very libertarian ideas, two ideas that will, without a doubt, appeal to the Trump base. However, he's also pro-abortion, anti-Second Amendment. There's no way you can square that circle with somebody who's, let's say, who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, 2020. And they say, well, you know what? I like cryptocurrency and I like decentralization. I'll just let the abortion thing and the Second Amendment thing go this time because of my Bitcoin. If you know what I mean. It's not tenable that people who vote for Trump.
People make choices all the time. And one of the advantages of the parliamentary system of government that you have in the UK is that you get almost single issue parties that respond to the needs of individual needs, or on a single issue or a small range of issues, and then can form coalitions. Okay, if the party in power doesn't gather a majority here, in the United States, it's a bifurcated system. There's only two major parties. So in effect, you've got coalitions within these parties. You got Matt Gaetz in the same party as Lynn Cheney. Okay. You've got Jesse Jackson in the same party as Joe Manchin. And that's because we only have two choices, right? So there's people always have to make choices. I think there's a lot of people that voted for Trump that didn't like his personality because they didn't care about that part of it. They didn't care that he was undignified. Other people, the being undignified was the defining factor for them why they would never vote for Trump. So, there's so many factors that go into who somebody might vote for, especially in an election where basically 75% of the people, Mark, said they wish neither of the major party candidates would run.
Yeah, it seems that it might turn out that RFK is possibly the only candidate with a positive approval rating as we near the election. Let's look at the electoral math briefly, if we may. You've got Joe Biden on one side, you've got Donald Trump, you've got a potential RFK in the Libertarian Party. I think that is at least worth 2.5%. As you say, it could go Ross Perot up to a great deal more, but 2.5% to 3% at least, as long as he stays the distance. And then you've got Cornel West in the Green Party. That's another, I can't see that being less than, was it Jill Stein who got 1.9%?
Yeah, I think
under Donald Trump. It can't be less than that, can it?
Yeah, he'll draw, I would suspect Cornel West will draw extreme progressives to the tune of about 2%. Yeah, and that'll come, of course, straight out of Biden's vote. The RFK vote, it's debatable, but I've got to think that it hurts Biden more because he is breaking with orthodoxy of one of the two major parties in his family as seminal members that basically helped his assassinated father and assassinated uncle helped to form the modern Democratic Party that we know today. And so being booted out of that party essentially makes a pretty strong statement. I think the people that are open to him on the conservative side are more people that like Trump and they admire RFK Jr., but they're not going to vote for him. At least that's my overheated take.
I would say you can take those numbers to the bank. Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
This was fun, Mark. Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hunter Biden pleads not guilty to gun crimes, and Donald Trump pleads not guilty in the court of public opinion for similar accusations. What's this all about? Well, we're lucky to be joined by Liberty Nation's Man About Town, legal affairs editor and host of the most excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire, to explain the gun issues on both sides of the political dynasty. Scott, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you.
Tell me, what's going on here? Now, we had Hunter Biden in court this last week where he, for 3 gun charges, I believe, and he pleaded not guilty to all 3 of those. What's the scope of his commitment to that plea?
If we may, Mark, I would actually handle the Trump matter first. I think it's more easily dispensed with and just requires a little less nuance. And it is that Donald Trump handled a particular firearm at a gun store in South Carolina and said, "Oh, I'd like to buy one of these." And somebody tweeted out that Donald Trump, bought this Glock, and because he is.
Just point out it was a specialized Glock with Donald Trump written on it.
Certainly, you can't expect former president of the United States to buy just any particular Glock.
The same kind of Glock that
for instance,
every schmo on the street might have.
Right.
Yeah,
no, it has to be extra. That he needs that second scoop. Don't forget.
Sure.
So then there was a kerfuffle about whether or not he did, and he is ineligible legally to purchase a firearm because he is charged with felonies, and he's undergoing, awaiting trial for those charges. He's ineligible to buy them. If he were to buy a firearm, he'd have to answer on a form, and this is why I wanted to talk about it before Mr. Hunter Biden, is he would have to say on a form that he wasn't currently charged with a serious crime, okay? And that would be, then he would have, because if he said, yes, I was, they would deny him the sale. And if he lied and said, no, I wasn't, then he would be committing a crime by lying on the form to get the firearm. And Mr. Trump or one of his spokespersons quickly announced that he did not, in fact, take possession of nor try to purchase that firearm. He merely expressed the interest that he would like to purchase the firearm.
Okay, right. So, in fact, just one question on that before we do move on to the meat of the story, which is the Hunter Biden court case here. So, even though Donald Trump has not been found guilty of the felonies for which he's being charged, his constitutional rights are in abeyance until that plays out.
Well, it's a funny thing, Mark, and we'll revisit this, I think, with the discussion of Mr. Hunter Biden's charges, that our Second Amendment rights are oftentimes in abeyance or otherwise restricted until the government decides that we may exercise them in a manner that frustrates gun rights proponents regularly.
Okay, but is that the only constitutional right that's stripped from somebody facing a felony charge without being found guilty? So still presumably, as long as we're following the rules here, still innocent. But that's the only constitutional right that is held in abeyance?
I can't think of any restriction on you could say that bail conditions often restrict the rights of travel, for instance, and also the consumption of intoxicating beverages, for instance, and maybe in jurisdictions where marijuana is legal, the consumption of that as well. I'm not sure. But in terms of the expression of a right, it's not like that you can't start a printing press or a website if you're under indictment, right? Just as a matter of course. But it does, the firearms laws as currently constituted do provide for the restriction of that right for anyone who is charged.
Okay, so let's move straight into Hunter Biden then. So there are 3 charges that he pleaded not guilty to in court this week. And what were those charges, please?
Well, falsifying a federal firearms form and illegal possession of a firearms while using a narcotic are the big ones. The form that we discussed with Donald Trump requires that you answer that you are not an active user of or addicted to narcotics, and Hunter Biden answered that he was not in order to be able to get possession of the firearm.
And then, of course, we know from his own writings that he was addicted and a user of substances during that time, from his own autobiography, right?
Well, that's where the charges originated from, is the publishing of his autobiography and basically him telling on himself that he was. So that is where the charges come from. And let me just hasten to add that there are many firearms rights advocates, myself included, who think that it is not okay to condition the expression of the Second Amendment right on the certification that one is, not doing things that the government doesn't want. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that these kinds of, pre-clearance forms are okay for the expression of rights. We don't have it for other rights, and it seems to me if it's inappropriate for that pre-clearance for other rights, then why is it okay in the instance of the Second Amendment or gun rights?
Okay, so there's certainly a bit of crossover here. Trump, if he had bought the gun in question, would be facing almost exactly the same charges as Hunter Biden, right?
Somehow I think the trial would have already occurred if
It would have already occurred, and the jumpsuits would have been worn, right?
First the verdict, then the trial in that case.
Of course,
sure.
of course. Well, if you do read the social media, the verdict has already been given on Donald Trump. But Hunter Biden, what are his chances, and what does he face? What music is the first son facing?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that's interesting is the Supreme Court's decision in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin case, which is the latest landmark Second Amendment gun rights case that is still kind of reverberating through the courts. And we're still learning what behavior, where the line is for gun rights and restrictions on that right. And so I think that has a strong chance of influencing how the charges against Hunter Biden play out if they're delayed that long. We'll see what the story is. The Supreme Court has currently a case on their calendar that may kind of dial in what they mean under the Bruin case. This is the U.S. v. Rahimi case, which is going to be argued in November, about domestic violence and whether or not a domestic violence kind of order can trigger the removal of firearms rights. So we may see some articulation of where things can go, but historically, did the founders' vision of liberty include one where people who had chemical dependency might have been denied or debarred the use of firearms? That's, I think, where the court would go with this kind of challenge, assuming it gets that far. Hunter Biden did have a plea deal in place that got blown up by the judge. And
let's ever so quickly, can we just let's talk about that plea deal. This is the same judge that's overseeing this present case as the one who threw out the acceptance of the plea deal that had been negotiated between Hunter Biden's lawyers and the Department of Justice, right? And she said this plea deal is not acceptable. Is that correct? It's the same judge, and that's what she said.
Yes, this is Judge Mary Ellen Noriega, who I was a Trump appointee to the federal courts, and basically the terms of the plea deal, as we understand them, they required the judge to make a determination as to whether or not Mr. Biden was substantially in compliance with the terms of his deal going forward. And we suspect the reason why is because they were insuring against a Republican generally, or more specifically, a Trump DOJ in the future, being unwilling to say that Hunter Biden did what he was supposed to. And so what the judge said was this impermissibly puts it's a separation of powers issue. That's the decision to prosecute is an executive function, not a judicial one, and it would put her in the position of being in the position to prosecute if she were the one to declare whether or not he was in compliance with the terms of the deal that they made. So
we'll see how, in light of the Bruin decision, this plays out for Hunter Biden, and if any new photos come out of Donald Trump, how it plays out for the former president. Scott DeCosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, right here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner, and Legal Eagle, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire, for joining us. Also, my thanks to you out there across the nation for taking the time to tune in. My final thought this week comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, quote, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there's no path and leave a trail," end quote. Now, when we think about the novel and perhaps unprecedented nature of recent political events and of the potential for danger that we see there, perhaps it's wiser to consider the words of Mr. Emerson and understand that whether we see it or not, some people may just be clearing paths for the rest of us. Something to think about there. Thank you for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.